Before I begin, I would like to thank EATS for giving us this opportunity to work on this, this document, as well as just to have us here and talk about the work that we did. So before I get started, just a little bit about where I'm from. I'm from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. A little plug for my hometown here. It's a little small coastal town from right in between Los Angeles and San Francisco. And Oprah Winfrey has called it the happiest place on earth. So just a little plug. Now let's move on to the topic of discussion today. Here is the overview of my talk. I'll talk a little bit about the overall topic. We'll discuss some historical trends in the relevant metrics to traffic safety and exposure. And then we'll talk about what are some of the organizations at the federal level that deal with the issue of traffic safety. And then I'll have some discussion of what traffic safety regulations have been implemented. And as you're going to see in the United States, it's really a state-by-state issue. So you know, different types of regulations come in and go out, and it kind of happens in different states. So it's essentially a tale of 50 states. Maybe not quite 50 states, but you know, every state kind of goes its own way, does some experiments, and then they figure out, hey, it's working, it's not working. So as you will see, the literature that I'm going to talk about there is very little in the way of national changes. It will be mostly like what happened in different states and how other states may have learned from it. And then we'll conclude the presentation with some concluding remarks. So this EATS-supported work is aimed at, we want to examine the trends in highway safety data in the United States since 1950, and what were the regulatory changes that were implemented in that period. And we'll also look at what is the judgment that literature has, the traffic safety literature has on various regulatory policies. And here what we have is, like in the United States, the data has been of better quality. So there is a lot of research that has already been done that we can actually take advantage of, although we still have a lot to learn. So here's the population trend. The population trend has been kind of steady in nature. As you can see, the populations has been going on. It's pretty steady rate of growth there. If you look at the vehicle mile traveled, it has a pretty steady growth, but you can see towards the end here, as we approach that current recession, I think there is some little drop-off in VMT. And that might have something to do with traffic safety as well, as we shall see in a minute. Here's the automobile ownership per 1,000 people. As you can see, it grew very fast through the 1980s. And then the rate kind of flattened out, even though it's still at the increasing trend. But the rate of growth has slowed quite a bit. Here's the fatalities per year. You can see, so 2006 was the year when the fatalities and the number of fatalities in the United States peak around slightly more than 42,000. And then it has been on a declining trend since then. Fatalities as a fraction of population, because the population has been growing, you can see that the trend is slightly more pronounced in terms of if you look at fatalities as normalized by the population. And then fatalities per 100 VMT is not as pronounced, as you can see here, but it has been on the declining trend for quite a while. So let me start off by the national organizations of traffic safety. So there have been like different organizations that have been active, but in 1950, it was the Bureau of Public Roads that was the organization responsible for all of traffic safety in the United States. In fact, pretty much all road transportation. And they were not even their own cabinet department, so it was under Department of Commerce. But in mid-60s, National Academy of Sciences in the US came out with a report stating that the road hazard is really killing a lot of people, and it's causing a lot of problems. So what happened is 1966, United States Congress took action and created Department of Transportation as a cabinet department. And once that happened, the act created the Federal Highway Administration, and it replaced Bureau of Public Roads. And then also several agencies that were established around the same time. they morphed into what we today know as National Highway Traffic Safety Administration that was established in 1970. And if you remember from those charts that I showed you, the traffic fatality trends have been on decline since, since this agency was established in 1970. And I don't want to comment on the causality of it, but there is certainly correlation there since the establishment of this agency. So what is the role of Federal Highway Administration? FHWA supports the state and local jurisdictions. It provides aid to them. It does research in the area of automobile safety, congestion, highway materials. And it also publishes what we call the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. And it governs, how should the roadway signage be posted, and where should the signals be placed, and all those kind of issues. And the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, on the other hand, is an agency within, it's a division within US Department of Transportation, and it carries out safety programs specifically. And it provides vehicle safety information to the consumer, so it'll provide some results of the crash tests that are conducted on different types of vehicles. And in addition to these government organizations, we have something called a non-profit organization called IIHS, which is the Institute of Highway Safety that was started by 3 major insurance companies in 1959, and it's now an independent research and communications organization, but it's still funded by the insurance industry quite a bit. And it also rates popular passenger vehicles and certain products associated with traffic safety, like your child seat. So those kind of things are rated by this institute. So I want to now start to look at the traffic safety regulations in the United States, and I'm going to be dividing them as I move along. And the first categorization that I have is the vehicle mandates. What do the automakers have to put on their vehicles? What kind of safety equipments do they have to put? So airbags is one. It was introduced in the 1960s, and it has been required on the driver's side since 1991. So on the driver's side, the airbags are a required equipment that every vehicle has to have now since 1991. And that's based on, and the research has borne out that, odds of a passenger dying in an automobile accident decline quite a bit since if the airbags are deployed. Seat belts in the USA, the federal law requiring seat belts to be installed on all automobiles was enacted in 1968. And this is, I'm not talking here about the seatbelt wearing mandates. I'm just talking about when it was mandated to be installed on the vehicles. And we'll come back to the regulations regarding seatbelt use in a minute. In addition to the airbags, now electronic stability control has been mandated, but it'll be the mandate will become effective starting 2012. The next category of regulations that I want to talk about is the driver and passenger information regulations. So I want to categorize them here in two subcategories, and those categories are the regulations that are designed to protect, exclusively the driver and passenger. So it'll be the seatbelt laws, so that you don't get thrown off the vehicle, and it essentially protects the passenger or the driver themselves. So it's kind of saving them from themselves kind of issue. Or the helmet laws will be of the example of the same thing. And the second set of regulations will be that protect the driver and passengers, but they also protect the surrounding road users. And those will be your driving under the influence regulations. And the reason I'm making that distinction here is because in the United States, there is a, shall we say, there is a significant, or at least somewhat more pronounced opposition or resistance to the first set of regulations. But the second set of regulations that protect the surrounding road users, they are easier to pass and implement. And we'll talk some more about specific implications of this in just one second. So seatbelt laws. And seatbelt laws, as I said, are basically protecting driver and passengers from themselves because they basically are protected in case of a crash. And 32 states have primary seatbelt enforcement. And what that means is if you have primary seatbelt enforcement, that means the cop can stop you for not wearing your seatbelt, just for not wearing your seatbelt. So they can basically look at you, and if you're not wearing a seatbelt, they can stop you. The 17 other states have secondary enforcement, and secondary enforcement means that the cop cannot just stop you for not wearing your seatbelt. But if they stop you for speeding violation, then they can see that you're not wearing a seatbelt, and then they can fine you. So that's your secondary enforcement. And I make that distinction again. There's one state that does not have any of these enforcement, either primary or secondary, of adult seatbelts, and that's New Hampshire. And their state motto is live free or die. I guess some people are in fact dying. But so that's that state has quite a libertarian streak, so that causes some issues in terms of implementing the seatbelt regulations, which is your first category. So it was found in a study in 2001 that if you look at 1-year crash data from before the seatbelt primary enforcement implementation versus 1-year data after the primary enforcement of seatbelts, there was a 17% reduction in primary enforcement states, and there was a 3% reduction in secondary states. So you can see that if there is a primary enforcement, probably more people are wearing the seat belts, and it's probably saving some lives there. And then helmet laws, and of course we all know that if you're wearing a helmet in case of a motorcycle collision, you're more likely to survive that collision. There was a study that found that in 1975, all but 3 states in the U.S., so all 47 states, about 47 out of 50 states had some laws requiring mandatory helmet use. But some states have rescinded those laws, and we've seen some impact of that in some literature. So in a 2004 study by Mueller, what was found out is that if you look at number of fatalities in Florida between 1994 and 2001, what was found that, what state of Florida did was in the year 2000, they exempted the adult motorcyclists from, wearing helmets if they had some kind of medical insurance. So if they had $10,000 of more of medical coverage, they were allowed to not wear helmet while riding bicycles. And it was shown that, there was a 48.6% increase in motorcycle occupant deaths because of that change in regulation. And it was shown that, if there was a lower increase if you account for other things, but there was certainly an increase, even when you account for miles traveled, even when you account for motorcycle registration. So there was a clear, increase in fatalities once the helmet laws were relaxed. And let's look at the DUI laws. And DUI laws are kind of easier to implement because they are, they are saving the other road users as well, and not just the driver and the passenger. And DUI is a significant problem because in the United States, as we all probably know, that there is a very big reliance on automobiles. There is a very big reliance on private transportation. So what happens is that, what has been found is that almost 1/3 of all fatalities are related with alcohol consumption. So that statistic has remained fairly consistent from 1994 through today. And even though we have, a lot of awareness campaigns and a lot of laws have been passed, still the statistic has remained consistent in the past 15-year period. In 1966 through 2005, there were a lot of states that, that lowered the minimum drinking age to 18 years. And that basically saw that under 21 years of age, the DUI violations as well as DUI-related fatalities increased. And one regulation that was found to be effective in the literature that helped, in terms of reducing the DUI-related violations was if you held liable the establishments that are selling alcohol, if you hold them liable to the crashes that happen because of the drivers who drive once drunk, that correlated very strongly with decrease in alcohol-related deaths. And lowering the blood alcohol limit from 0.10 to 0.08 also reduced the alcohol-related crashes anywhere between 3 to 40%. And again, this is where different states come into picture. In some states, you saw more fatality changes because there might be, other things going on in those states. And some states saw a little bit less reduction. But anywhere between 3 to 40% reduction was noticed when the BAC limit was lowered, the blood alcohol limit, blood alcohol concentration. The next set of driver regulations that I want to talk about is the graduated licensing programs. These graduated licensing programs are essentially, you don't let the teens drive pretty much right away. They can't just go to the DMV office or Department of Motor Vehicles and get their license. What they need to do is they need to do it in steps. So typically it has three states or three stages before you can get your full license. So first stage is where you're supposed to drive with adult over 21 always sitting beside you. The second stage is when that thing is relaxed and you can drive alone sometime. If you're a teen driver, you can drive alone sometime, but not in a situation. So in the nighttime, you cannot drive alone, or you cannot drive with more than two teen passengers, for example. So these graduated licensing programs have led to lower fatalities among young drivers because it makes them more prepared before they're on the road. So that three-stage structure has been shown to have at least 5.6% reduction in fatalities, according to a 2005 study. And if you have a more restrictive program where you don't let them drive, if you have, if your second stage is more restrictive than the first one, the good programs that are ranked by IIHS, the programs that are more restrictive, have led to as much reduction as a 19% reduction in fatalities for the 15 and 17-year-old demographic. So now, because the benefits are so clear, and because teen drivers is a menace to not just themselves, but everybody else, these programs have been adopted by pretty much everybody, pretty much all states. In terms of national regulations, that was part of the US traffic safety culture was the national maximum speed limit of 55 miles per hour. And it was instituted in response to 1973 oil embargo. And because of that, what happened was that, and again, I don't want to imply causality here, but what happened was that in 54,000 fatalities in 1973, it went down to 45,000 in 1974. And it's very likely that it was a causal relationship, but I would refrain from making that pronouncement. This was, again, because this was thought to be a causality, the United States Congress implemented a public law making the change in speed limit permanent. So they said, okay, we're going to have 55 miles per hour speed limit all throughout the country, with highway safety being the stated purpose. So, but there was, again, there was significant opposition to it because the freeways were well designed, and because the design speeds were higher, drivers were either not following the regulation or getting a lot of tickets, and it was into pop culture. Sammy Hagar recorded a pop song, "I Can't Drive 55." It was a pretty popular song at the time, and so it basically there was a lot of pressure on the government to kind of relax those laws. And in 1987, states were allowed to raise the speed limits. And in 1995, the national speed limit was gone from the landscape. And most of the studies that looked at these data, like effect of removing, instituting the 55 miles per hour limit first, and then removing the 55 miles per hour speed limit, then they found that, definitely rate of fatal crashes increased, or rate of severe crashes definitely increased because of the higher speed limits. But on overall crash rate and frequency, the results were mixed, so you couldn't make a connection either way, whether one speed limit was better or worse for total crash rates. So these are the sets of regulations that I wanted to talk about, and I want to now, so you have the picture of not just what has happened in the US in terms of the culture, safety culture, but you also have some idea about what kind of resistance is being faced when certain laws are implemented. So National Highway Traffic Safety Administration has, I would like to mention that they instituted a campaign back in early 2000s, I believe. The campaign was called Crashes Aren't Accidents. So what they tried to do was institute a terminology of trying to remove the terminology called accident from the traffic safety literature, as well as from traffic safety professionals that are working in the field. And their logic was that if you use the term accident, it gives the impression that it's all a matter of chance, and you can't actually do anything about removing or reducing those accidents, right? So that's why they wanted to use the term crashes. And crashes is a better term, and I'm not sure how it's going to translate when you're doing the translation, but crashes aren't accidents was a big campaign by NHTSA, and it has somewhat succeeded in changing the culture in certain organizations. The other issue that comes up is like whether you have certain laws on the books and how is the enforcement on the ground. So if you might have very good laws on the books, but if they're not being enforced in an equitable manner and in a consistent manner, then those regulations might be useless. if you look at the data, US seems to be going in the right direction. We've seen reduction in traffic fatalities, a lot of different things. But what remains to be seen is that if these reductions are temporary in nature because of the economy that is slowing. So is the bad economy bringing us the good news on traffic safety? Maybe, but maybe not. We'll find out hopefully when the economy improves at some point. So, so what USA needs to do is they need to continue to implement policies and as well as learn from attempts abroad, countries like Japan that have implemented. And this effort by IATS is definitely a step in that direction. So I would like to conclude my presentation with this.